Okay, so greetings to everybody. So stay with me and let's see if we can focus on something very interesting. And I will try to focus here, not only on the Tisha B'Av message, but also the book of Devarim, Deuteronomy, which we've just begun reading, which is a fascinating and a very amazing opportunity to talk about a structure of Torah. This reaches deep into the philosophical, deep into the Kabbalistic, into the male-female distinction. So let's try and do some work together. Here's the question. Question one. On Tisha B'Av, we are observing the customs of mourning. In fact, some of the commentaries say we mourn even more intensely than we do for a family member. We are sitting on the ground. We are not eating. We fast. In addition to the normal laws of mourning, we're not wearing shoes. We are mourning for one who has died. Who has died is the destruction of the temple, which means an emptiness in the world, a void where the spiritual presence has left, right? The Shekhinah, the divine presence, has left, and of course that is exactly what a death is. A death, lo aleinu, is where a body is left void of a neshama. You know, the Hebrew word for a corpse is a halal. The literal meaning of halal means something empty, right? It's an empty space, a vacuum, a void. The body is void of the soul, right? That is what a corpse is. And on Tisha B'Av, we experience the corpse of Jewish existence. The Shekhinah have been taken out of our lives in the most immediate form, in the format of the temple, the Beit HaMikdash, where the Shekhinah has left and left an emptiness behind. So we're observing the laws of mourning. But here's one peculiarity of the laws of mourning, and that is that in the afternoon of Tisha B'Av, from midday on, the mourning lessens. Right? For example, it is permissible to sit on a chair, a normal chair, not on a low stool or the ground, from midday of the 9th of Av on. The mourning lessens in the afternoon. And the question is why? Why? First of all, the day is a day of mourning, right? We don't have in other Jewish festivals or celebrations or anniversaries, we don't have a concept of the day changing at midday in this fashion. What should explain why we change the format and we find the morning is lightened as the day progresses? Furthermore, and this is something the Arizal refers to, furthermore, the lessening of the morning in the afternoon of Tisha B'Av is even more peculiar, because that's exactly the time when the temple burnt. The entry into the temple occurred the night before and during the morning. That's when the attack took place on the temple. Here we're talking in particular about the Romans in the second temple. But the temple was actually burnt from midday on, and it actually burned through the afternoon and through the night and onto the 10th as well. In fact, the Talmud has a debate about whether Tisha B'Av should have been on the 9th or the 10th of Av. And in fact, some people do mourn for both days. And in fact, we all have a custom that on the day of Tisha B'Av, the day after Tisha B'Av, we're observing the laws of the 9 days, like not eating meat and not bathing for pleasure and not doing laundry until midday on the 10th as well. So here's the paradox. In the afternoon of Tisha B'Av, we have a situation where the temple was actually set on fire, where the actual collapse of the building took place. And yet when that is going on, the actual manifestation of total destruction, we mourn less than previously. Right? That is a very perplexing issue. Do we all share the meaning of this question? Just give me a quick, give me an objection. Anybody does not follow the difficulty, let me know. I want to be sure we're together on this. Okay. So that's the first question. Right? Very strange. The destruction intensifies and we celebrate with less mourning. Right? Very, very strange. Question number two. Listen, follow me well. In the laws of a get, a get being the document of divorce, right? Document of divorce. Why are we speaking about documents of divorce here? Because our relationship with Hashem, our relationship with God, is a format of divorce, right? So, so when he left, we have been banished from that relationship. We are going through a temporary separation, and therefore our thoughts turn, and we would not be surprised to find some echo in the concept of a divorce. Well, here it is. The Talmud says that a divorce document is written in 12 lines. Right? The lines have to be scored and it has to be written in a certain fashion. It's a document, a legal document, has to follow the format that the Torah dictates. And there are 12 lines in a get, a bill of divorce. If you'd like a cool way of remembering that, the word get in Hebrew adds up to 12, right? The letters that make up the word get are actually gematria adding up to 12. So a get has to have 12 lines. The Gemara says the reason that a get needs 12 lines is because a get is a bill of separation. And where would you look to an original bill of separation? You would look at the separation between the books of the Torah. After all, we know that the Torah is written in 5 books, right? We call it Chumash for that reason, which means 5. And the Torah itself is written in 5 books with gaps between the books. And the Gemara says that since there are 4 lines between each book, right? 4 lines, space. In other words, when you come to the end of the text of Genesis, for example, Bereshis, and before you move on to Shmois, the scribe will write a Sefer Torah, he'll leave 4 lines blank. So you can see as you scroll through a Sefer Torah, you can see where one book ends and one begins. If there are 4 lines between the books, that adds up to 12 lines between the 5 books of the Torah. And since we have 12 lines of separation in the original archetypal document of the world, right? The original, the Torah being the document on which the world is written, that is the ultimate and prototypal format of separation. And so when you have 5 books and you put 4 lines between each of the books, you end up with 12 lines. And so a document of divorce has to have 12 lines. Oh, Tamar, you were first off the mark. Beautiful. Rena, welcome. Haven't seen you for a while. Let's see your question. That's a very interesting thought, Rena, but I'm going to offer you something deeper if I may. Rena said, Rachel, you want to know what Rena said? Yes, I would. I don't blame you. Rena is a black belt in her own right, and we've known each other for many years. She's suggesting that since we are reaching a stage of finality, it's an elegant thought Rena's putting forward. Since we've reached a stage of finality, the temple is burning, there's no way back, we have a sense of resignation, that could be a lessening in the morning, a very deep emotional psychological thesis. Rena, that may well be true, but I'm going to suggest something else. But before we get to that, I would like to ask you a technical difficulty. Chaim, absolutely. Chana Rachel, absolutely. David Yehuda, you're not with us yet. Leah, yes, indeed. Lag BaOmer, Miriam, not familiar with that. Richard, great. Chana, Jane. Okay, we're on the ball. Here's the problem. You have put your finger on a question that Tosfos, the classic commentator on the Talmud, raises. If you have 5 books, you have 4 degrees of separation. 4 degrees times 4 is 16, not 12, right? Let me make that plain for those who are not with me. Here are 5 books. Count the gaps between 5 books. 1, 2, 3, 4, right? So between 5 books, you have 4 gaps. If you have 4 gaps of 4 lines each, you have 16 lines, not 12, right? We have a problem. Now, the Talmud certainly knows its arithmetic, right? Or as in America, you say math. Yeah, it can do the math. And so if you do the math and you count 5 books, which have 4 degrees of separation between them, 4 times 4 is 16. Oh, Rachel, that's an amazing answer. That is an amazing answer, Rachel. Where is your source for that? Oh, Harry, whoa, amazing. I'm in the presence of greatness here. And there are 7 books indeed, but they're conventionally broken into 5. I'm not going to go into the 7 now. Sharon, that may be true, but how does that explain? No, you say there are 12 tribes indeed, but we're dealing with a technical problem. We have 4 separations between 5 books. Rachel, I would like to know where you got that answer from. Right, I've been very impressed. Tamara, amazing. Well, we have a number of suggestions that are in line with Tosfos, no less. Richard, yes, amazing. I'm lost in admiration. Amazing. Okay, let me speak out what you are saying, because you are very much in tune with the great authorities of 800 years ago. And I would like to speak it out. So Tosfos says this. Tosfos says, difference of separation in 4 books is 3 separations. Rachel, but there are 5 books, right? There are 5 books, and therefore 4 degrees of separation. Okay, hold your comments for a moment. Let me tell you what Tosfos says. Tosfos says that we don't count the separation between the fourth and fifth books because the fifth book is only repetition. Okay, Rachel and a few others put your finger on it exactly. It is a review and it is a repetition. The book of Devarim, Deuteronomy. In fact, anyone who knows a little Greek knows that Deuteronomy means the second or the repeated book. And that is why we don't count the gap between the fourth and fifth books. The reason being that the fifth book is a review or a repetition. Very strange. Very strange. First of all, it is a separation. So why do you not count it? Secondly, why is the fact that the fifth book of Torah is a repetition? Why does that mean there's no valid separation? Why do we count the fifth book as attached to all the others? Because it is a book of a different kind. Because it is a book of repetition. How does that justify the fact that we overlook the separation before that book? Let me just take a moment to read your comments. Chaim, yes, indeed, absolutely. You're thinking ahead. Yes, indeed. Okay, I'm getting some amazing comments here. I'm, as I say, lost in admiration, right? And I hope it'll be my privilege to spend time with you personally, and learn more from you. But give me a moment, Richard. That is true, but I don't see the fact that Dvarim is a whole unto itself. On the contrary, if it's a whole unto itself, it is even more separated than the other four. Let me ask you to hold the comments, please, if you may. I'll tell you why, because I don't like to see you writing a question or a comment that I ignore. Joe, yes, it's not making sense. Let me ask you, please, control yourselves, hold the comments briefly, and the reason is I'd like to develop a thesis for you, and I like to respect your questions and comments, and therefore I feel obliged to respond to them and not ignore them. So hold the questions for a little. Let me just build a thesis here. The point is that we are only counting 4 degrees of separation, and the fifth book is not considered to be separate. Let's put that question aside and ask one more question. In the book of Lamentations, right, the book of Lamentations that we read, we have a peculiarity, right? The peculiarity, this actually begins, I think, the way it's put in the Midrashic literature, and again, with the Arizal, we put it like this. When we talk about, in Psalms, in Tehillim, when Psalms talks about the destruction of the temple, it begins with a very strange expression, Mizmor la'asaf. Mizmor la'asaf means a song of the composer, or not the composer, more the conductor, right? Asaf is the conductor of the orchestra. So we introduce a description of a Psalm's description of the destruction, the entry of the enemy into the temple. It begins with Mizmor Asaf, a song to Asaf. Ba'u goyim nachalasecha. The Gentiles, or the idolaters, the strangers, the enemies have entered your sanctuary, and proceeds to describe the entry of the enemy into the temple and its destruction. On that, our sages asked a pretty obvious question. Why is that description beginning with Mizmor Asaf, a song to Asaf? It should be called a mourning to Asaf, a dirge, a lament to Asaf, right? You don't talk about a destruction and introduce it with the word a song. That's completely inappropriate. Why is it called a song, which is usually something of uplift, instead of a mourning? Okay, and the answer given is this, right? Here's the answer, very difficult to understand. Here's the answer. Because when the temple burnt, right, that represented God taking out his anger, venting his fury on stones and wood. And because he vented his anger on wood and stones, the Jewish people survived. Right? Very, very peculiar. Let me say it again. The reason that we say a song of our stuff is that when the temple is in the throes of destruction, the joy and the reason for singing there is because the reason for our survival is the destruction of the temple. I know it sounds peculiar. Tamar, I'm with you. Stay with me. We'll try to explain all of this. Right? Torah is deep beyond imagination. And at first sight, many things seem paradoxical, but let's think this through. God was venting his anger, right? He's pouring out his wrath on stones and wood, and when they collapse and burn, it means that the Jewish people survive. Instead of his anger being vented on us, and we becoming subject to destruction, the building is destroyed, and we survive. And that's enough reason to say a song of Asaf, right? Now, obviously, this needs a lot of explanation. Right? We're making the problem worse as we go along. First of all, God is not a petulant child, chas v'shalom, who needs to vent his anger. Otherwise, he'll do damage that he will regret later. What is the meaning? What is the divine plan in manifesting a destruction on a building? And how does the divine plan work in such a way that the destruction of the building means our salvation and our survival? Right? That needs thought. Let me add one more question, if I may. Let me add one more question. Andrew, Joe, can you hold the questions, please? Or put your things on the put your comments down, but I'll give me a chance to build a thought before I come back to them. One more question, if I may. When Jeremiah describes, Rachel, if you write me long essays, I don't have time to go through them. Too long for me to take in now. Just give me a moment, if I may. Crave your indulgence. One more question. When Jeremiah wrote the book of Eicha, right, the book of Lamentations, Haley, nice to see you with us. In the book of Lamentations, Jeremiah ends with the phrase, a verse of total destruction, right? Katsafta aleinu, you have been exceedingly angry with us, right? Tremendous fury you've shown us, and that's how the book ends. Katsafta aleinu ad moed, you've been extremely, violently angry with us. That's where the book ends. We don't end the book like that. When we read the book of Eicha, the book of Lamentations, we add a verse of hope. The second last verse is a verse of hope and a prayer for redemption, right? Hashivenu Hashem Alecho, God, please return us to you. V'nashuva, we will return. Rena, you're writing again. Why does that mean a mizmor, Rena? I don't get it. Why is death, Golus is considered death? You mean Golus as opposed to death? That's why it's a mizmor. Indeed, that's what we're saying, if I understand you correctly. All right, hold the comments for a moment. Here's what we're saying. When we end the book of Eicha, we don't want to end on a note of destruction. So we repeat the second last verse. Right? We say, Hashivenu Hashem Alecha, please Hashem, return us to you. We will return, a verse of hope and prayer for redemption. When you repeat that verse and we make a fuss about it, it's repeated twice. The person reading the Megillah says it and we say it. The question to ask is this: why is it legitimate? How can we even think of ending the way Jeremiah did not end? He decided to end the book of Eicha. Jeremiah wrote a prophetic work. The prophetic work ends on a verse of destruction. If he wrote it that way, it must be written that way. We're talking about something which is a projection of God's message to us. Hashem speaks that way. Jeremiah is writing prophetic dictation, right? He's uttering words that come from Hashem. And his words end on a verse of destruction. What right do we have? What's the logic in adding a verse of consolation and hope? Let me put it to you this way. If we can do that, why could he not? If the Jewish people's sensitivity is that we don't end on a note of destruction, right? If that's the sensitivity of the Jewish people, and we manifest that, we add that verse of hope. Why did he not do that? Great leader of the Jewish people. Why could he not do that? And conversely, if he decided not to do it, and the book needs to end on a note of destruction, why don't we accept it that way? Right? There's a very strong suggestion that Jeremiah was in a position which required him to end on destruction. He was unable to end on a note of hope. We are not in that position, right? We can do what he could not do. This is very weird, right? So we have a list of questions here, and I'd like to try to explain them. Well, your comments are coming in fast and furious. Who added it, Tamar? We did. Jewish people, that's our custom. Harry, that's true, indeed. I don't see how that deals with our questions, Harry. It is true, as you point out, that the book of Jeremiah and the book of Eicha, Lamentations, was written as a warning. It is true the prophets were not writing them. There's no big deal writing after the fact, right? If you describe a destruction after the fact, you don't call that prophecy. The prophecy was written before the fact as a warning, not an inviolable, inevitable event. That is true. But nevertheless, he's talking about destruction. Jeremiah's words, that is a hope, don't follow you there. Shoshana, we need all the hope we can get. Why didn't Jeremiah give it to us, if that's the case? Not a permanent separation. That's true, Shoshana. Sure, he was a prophet. You're talking about Jeremiah, Tamar, right? Yirmiyah, the great prophet who prophesied the destruction. Yes, Amy, indeed, different generations. Totally, that is a very, very powerful suggestion, and I will try to explain this. Henry, yes, it is always conditional indeed. Okay, I hear your suggestion. Rachel, yes, but isn't the Torah in our hands? Indeed, Chanarachel, it is indeed in our hands. So we can indeed add a line. The question is, why could our great prophet not add that line of hope? Leah, person needing to pray for the rebuilding. Yeah, but Leah, that applies to the whole destruction. Why is it at the time when the sticks and stones burn and the building collapses that positivity emerges? Okay, let me try to find a way through these questions. Jane, I don't think that Rabbi Akiva and his friends, I don't think that explains the break point at midday, right, when the temple actually collapses as a building. Right? I think your point about rejoicing because you see a forthcoming rebuilding, I think that applies to the whole situation. Okay, let me try to suggest to you a way through all of this. And to do this, I'd like to speak a little bit of length about the book of Devarim. And I'm doing this not because it's more necessary than the other components of our discussion, but because this week we begin reading the book of Devarim. And so let's have a bit of an understanding about the nature of that book. Here's the fundamental idea. The first 4 books of Torah are books written by the giver. The 5th book of Torah, Devarim, is written by the receiver. In other words, to put it, there are many ways it's put in our commentaries, the Orach Chaim, the Maharal, the Gaon of Vilna, and others. There are different ways of looking at this, right? Some quite strikingly counterpoised to each other. But let me suggest to you at least 1 or 2 ways of looking at this. This is a very deep idea, needs examination, needs thought. The first 4 books, and we've discussed many times before we even began Mesilas Yesharim, we know that the soul is made of 5 components, right? We know the soul goes nefesh, ruach, neshama, chaya, yechida. And so we know that there are 5 levels. The 5th level, the lowest one, is always the level of meeting the vessel. Right? The lowest level of the soul called the nefesh, that's called shidufa de gufa. That is the part of the soul that is in common with the body. It's the glue, if you like, between soul and body. It is the aspect of the soul that we call female. Why? Because the woman is the one who brings the process down into the body, and there she replicates it and reproduces it. Right? Again, you always have 4 steps of building, and the 5th one is the one who reflects and gives it back. The process of conception, pregnancy, the whole progression, right, ends up in the female, and it's from her body that a repetition takes place, a reduplication. She gives back what she received in essence. She receives a seed, which is the seed of conception, and then she merges that with her own being, and she produces a replication of the relationship. Right? Birth is from the 5th dimension, the lowest part of the soul, where the body becomes operative, right? Where the body can actually function in the world and produce something new, give birth to something new. That is called Midas HaMalchus, right? And in Kabbalistic writing, it's called the Nukva, the female. You think about it for a moment, just for a moment, you realize the first 4 books of Torah are books written by God. The expression we use is Shechina Medaberes Mitoch Groina Shel Moshe. He is opening his mouth and God speaks. The 5th book is not like that. The 5th book is where the receiver gives it back. Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, repeats what he has been told. 10 commandments repeated again. Many mitzvahs repeated again. The book of Devarim, unlike the first 4 books are God speaking. The 5th book is Moshe speaking as a prophet. The first 4, he speaks unlike any prophet. He opens his mouth and the Shekhinah speaks. The 5th book, he speaks like a prophet, where he delivers a message and God ratifies it. Right? He's now giving birth, taking the seed that is impregnated in him and giving birth to it with a replication, a reduplication of the Torah that has an element of his own image. You can hear resonating here the beginning of the idea of the oral law. What is the oral law? It's all the levels of Torah that we absorb, and then we become, so to speak, pregnant with that, and we give birth to a Torah of our own creation. What is the oral law? It is a product of rabbinic genius. It's the product of rabbinic genius, totally true to the seed that it has received from above, working with it, gestating it, and producing it as an incredibly dazzling work of totally true, right? The woman, totally true to her husband, taking the seed from her husband, totally true to that, and giving birth to something that is both one at the same time true to the original and tremendously creatively new, a reconstruction of something new. That is the fifth book. Why do we call that the female? There are so many ways to see this. Let me give you a few suggestions. Point one, what is the last incident in the story of the Jewish people before the fifth book begins? Think about it, look back, and you'll see the 5 women. 5, always the number of the female. And women, the daughters of Tzlofchad, they come forward and they request their share in the land. And the land is the female dimension. We referred to this many times. Hashem, God, the spiritual dimension, male. The land, the earth, the field, the stones of reality, those are all female words in Hebrew. The earth is female, right? And therefore, the 5 women, just before the fifth book is about to manifest, these 5 women come forward and they say, where's our share in the land? That is the portentous event that leads to the Jewish people going into the land. The woman's desire for the land of Israel. It is always women who desire the land. Women find the land of Israel precious, right? The women would never have accepted a false report of the spies. The women had nothing to do with that. Sonia just explained that 5 is the number of women because it's the final dimension of the 5 steps in the soul where the vessel is met. You know, one beautiful hint to this, when the spies were sent, Hashem's language, God's language to Moshe was Shlach lecha anoshim, send for yourself men, send spies, Shlach lecha anoshim. And one of the overtones in that sentence is Shlach lecha, send them for you, right? And most of the commentaries point out that this was not an obligation. This is something, if you want to do it, you can do it. I'm not commanding you. It's a good land. Trust me, you don't need spies. But if you want to do it, Shlach lecha, send for you, send for yourself men to spy the land. There's one commentary, right? One source in Chazal that says something absolutely exquisite. Listen to the words carefully. Shlach lecha anoshim, send for yourself men. God said to Moses, had you asked me, I would have sent women. You send men, I would have sent women. Men may well come back with a bad report about the land. Women will never say bad about the land of Israel, right? They love it. And therefore it's the 5 girls, the 5 women who come forward and they defend their portion of a share in the land. And therefore, the land is always the feminine dimension. That's called the earth. It's called Afar in Kabbalistic language. This is always the dimension of birth, right? The male begins the process from outside. The woman is constructing it and going through all the practicalities of reproducing and giving that back. So the book of Devarim is the book of the receiver. What does it mean in practical terms? Some commentaries say, for example, the Maharal and Orach Chaim, they say that the first 4 books were spoken through Moshe. So he opened his mouth, so to speak, and Hashem spoke. The 5th book was said like any other book of prophecy. God spoke it to him at one time and he repeated it later. How does a prophet speak? He has an isolated relationship with Hashem. Hashem gives him the message, and then he goes to the Jewish people subsequently and repeats the message that he was given. Right? That's the normal mode of prophecy. That's how the book of Devarim was written. The first 4 books were not spoken that way. The first 4 books are Moses being a vehicle, a channel, and the one speaking is God. In the 5th book, Moses is not a channel in that sense. He's a receiver, he absorbs it, and then he says it. Right? That's one way of putting it. And the style is utterly different. The first 4 books, there's no style at all. It is God speaking. The 5th book is the style of Moshe, and it has many elements in common with subsequent prophecy. I'll give you one. Here's one, very beautiful to understand this. You know that one of the features of Torah is that it is the deepest of all wisdoms, but it can be understood by anyone. Anyone. You can take Torah and read it. A 10-year-old, a 6-year-old can read Torah and have no problem understanding it. In fact, it's done all the time. Children start school, they may be 6 years old, and they read the Torah from the book of Genesis through to the end. They have no trouble understanding it, even though they have no idea of the depth that they're reading, but it can be readily understood at one level by anyone. That is not true of the books of the prophets. In the books of prophecy, there are sophisticated concepts, complicated poetic expressions, referring to complex notions, many of which are almost untranslatable. You cannot give a child the book of Isaiah and expect him to make any sense of it at all. Again, you can take a 10-year-old, he will read the whole Chumash to you from beginning to end and have no trouble translating anything. But you give a 10-year-old the book of Isaiah, he will not have a clue what he's talking about. The level of Torah is so great that it is meaningful at any level of human understanding, right, with no limit to its depth. The books of the prophets do not have that skill, that depth, that craft, that cunning. They are the words of humans speaking at a very sophisticated level, and they cannot at the same time speak at a simplistic level. Look carefully into the book of Dvarim, and you will find that it has sections that are of that kind. Right? Yosef Avenu, words there, right? In the song, particularly in the Shira, words in the book of Dvarim that are extremely complex poetic expressions, right? That you look in the Chumash, you'll find that in the first part of Chumash, the main text is the Chumash and Rashi is small. When it gets to the Shiras HaZinu, for example, most of the page is taken up with Rashi. We need a lot of help interpreting it. And that is because this is a book said by the great prophet Moshe, and it is said with the style of subsequent prophecy. And there's much more we could say about this. Give me a second, please. Chana Rachel, the reason that Dvarim has Moshe-ness, as you put it, is because Torah has to contain both the giver and the receiver. It has to have the first 4 books coming down from a higher world, and then it has to have the mechanism of our achieving independence. It has to have the male and female components. And the female component of Torah is the 5th book. This is the root of our independence, where we get to create ourselves, where we get to absorb, understand, and then produce creatively. As I said before, this is where the root of the oral law is founded. One of the roots of the oral law, which is the Jewish people's genius. We are not simply a people who absorb something carved in stone, and then we cannot move, and we cannot develop it. The point of being Jewish is to receive an absolute Torah that works on us, develops us, ferments within our characters, becomes part of the hearts and minds of the Jewish people, and from that something is produced of exquisite beauty, which is totally true to the original, and yet contains our birth process of creativity as well. David Yehuda, Bilam is a different story. That's interesting. Bilam is a different story entirely. That is an extraneous book written by Bilam in our praise that was put in. I don't want to go into what Bilam is now. I'm not sure what your question is, Tamar. It is human Chaim, the book of Dvarim, in the sense of a prophet. Again, don't make no mistake about this. This is God's words. But these are Hashem's words spoken through Moshe in a way different than the first 4. And therefore, what this Medrash, what this Chazal are telling us, the sages are telling us, the separation between the 4th and the 5th is not a separation. The 5th is bonded onto the rest of Torah as a woman bonded, right, in the relationship that produces a child. That is not a degree of separation. Right? Completely different order of distinction is taking place here. Okay, let's go back to our main theme, try to answer our questions about Tisha B'Av. Here's the key. The key is that the destruction of the temple was a watershed moment in transition between phases of human history, of Jewish history. And here's the major principle. Until that time in history, right, until the temple was destroyed and the divine presence went into exile and humans took over, right? You remember that shortly after that, right, we're talking about around that time, around the time of the destruction of the Second Temple, shortly before that, we had experienced the men of the Great Assembly, right? The men of the Great Assembly were those who presided over the loss of prophecy, right? Prophecy existed until about 2,350 years ago, and then the world went dark. In the gradual decline of the generations, right, we eventually reached a point where prophecy was lost and the world went dark. Right? That was the major event, and the destruction of the temple is a nodal point in that process. In the Second Temple, it is true prophecy had been lost already, but at least the vehicle, at least the vessel, at least the building, the place in which the divine voice speaks from between the 2 golden angels, right? That still stood. That edifice, that structure, that possibility existed in the world. When the temple was destroyed, when the flames consumed the wood and the wood and stones collapsed, at that moment, the divine presence left the world. Right? The possibility, the home of the divine presence left the world. And the destruction that destruction made possible, right, a different sanctuary for the Torah, and that became us. Venting his fury means, by destroying the building, removing himself, his vehicle, his sanctuary, his place in the world, by taking that out of the world, the Torah was forced into a new home. And that new home is called the Jewish people. We survived because the temple was destroyed. Right? We survive because Torah needs to survive in the world, and we become the vehicle. We become the Oren, the holy ark of Torah. You know that we can say this in another way. There are a lot of ideas that need to be put together here. We can say this in another way. The Gemara says that Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, called God. The way he described God was Akel, Hagodol, Hagibor, Vanoira. Right? Hagodol, Hagibor, Vanoira. Great, mighty, and awesome. That's how he described God. Jeremiah left out the word Noira. He called God by the first two names. He could not call him Noira, could not call him awesome. Why? The language there is the Nochrim Mecharcherim Bahecholoi. That means Nochrim Mecharcherim, the non-Jews, the Gentiles, the enemies, are now crowing and cackling in the temple. How can we call God Noira? We can't call him awesome. His awesomeness is in the temple, which is so fearsome and so awesome that if a stranger enters, he dies. And now it's been reduced to a pile of rubble. You can't call God Noira in a situation where the home of his awesomeness no longer stands. And you know there's a law, very, very clear, that you may only praise Hashem with a quality that is current. Daniel, nice to see you with us. Am I dealing with Daniel from Australia? If so, I'm looking forward to seeing you. Why does he need a physical structure to have a dwelling presence in the world? Is not a question I can go into now, Daniel. It's not something, Seattle. Okay, right. Wrong, Daniel. Good, fine. This is not a question I can go into now, but whatever the answer to your question will be, we see that he craves a dwelling place in the lower world. There's a big debate in our later sages. What is the meaning for that? And what's the reason for that? Indulge me by not obliging me to go into that now, because we'll never get through our subject. Please. So you can only praise Hashem with a quality that is current. Right? For example, if you say HaMelech HaKadosh, right, you call God the Holy King, at a time other than Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, you have to repeat your prayer. It's an invalid title because it's not current at the time. During the 10 days from Rosh Hashanah to Yom Kippur, you call him king because he manifests as king of the world then. That's a very clear concept, halachically, that you should only praise Hashem with the quality that is manifest. And so when the quality of Noira disappeared from the world, at that time, it became impossible to praise Hashem with the word Noira. And so Jeremiah was obliged to drop that term. And that's why he no longer said that. Now you have the men of the Great Assembly. The language there is that the Talmudic language is they returned the crown to its former glory. What did they do? They added the word Noira in again. They found it possible to say the word Noira, that God is awesome. And the question that arises is, how is he awesome when he's no longer in the world? And the answer given is this. The survival of the Jewish people represents his awesomeness. That means prior to that time, his awesome presence was palpable and felt in the temple. Now that's no longer here, and he hides, he recedes behind the scenes, he remains silent, and yet manifests our survival miraculously, when we no longer live with the temple, right? And a status in our land, which is a basis for existence. We're now exiled among, as it's called, the 70 wolves, the one lamb, the one sheep among the 70 wolves. There's no chance of survival. You take a tiny nation, a tiny, minuscule fraction of the world's population. As you all know, our numbers are not even equal to the statistical error in the Chinese census. Right? That's not even what we come to. Fraction of a percent. And you take a nation hated by everyone, exiled into the world, with no land, no army, no means of defense, completely at the mercy of the nations, who are assiduously trying to kill us for thousands of years, and we still survive. Right? That is miraculous. It's a new form of miracle. It's a hidden miracle. And the praise we give is Mi kamocha ba'elim Hashem. Who is great among the mighty ones like you? On that the sages say, not ba'elim Hashem, but ilmim Hashem. The dumb ones, the ones who speak not, or the ones who remain silent. By holding your silence and not revealing yourself in the world, and secretly supporting the existence of the Jewish people, like Rav Yaakov Envin says, in his eyes, the greatest miracle of all is the survival of the Jewish people in a world trying to kill us. Right? It's as close to a revealed miracle as you could hope for. Just to give you one example, 1948, on the Declaration of Independence in Israel, on the day that Israel was declared an independent country, not unilaterally, but by the permission of the nations of the world, right? The League of Nations now declares that Israel is a country unto itself. And on Independence Day 1948, Israel became a country inhabited by 600,000 shell-shocked skeletons, people whose parents had been gassed and tortured, right? A motley crew of shell-shocked survivors. And on that day, 400 million Arabs attacked. Right? 5 Arab armies, well-armed, modern weapons, well-trained, right? Professional soldiers. 400 million Arabs attack a handful of stragglers without weapons. The weapons they used, the rifles, were old Belgian FN rifles from the First World War. The Israeli Air Force consisted of one plane, right? A little Piper Cub, flown by a South African, as it happens, who tried to drop hand grenades over the side. And what happened? We won, right? I mean, if that isn't miraculous, I don't know what is. Right? We won, and not only that, the country became enlarged, and it's still there today. So here's the thing. The manifestation of Hashem in the world is in the temple. That's a prophetic manifestation. Jeremiah sees that disappear. He can no longer say Noirah. He sees an unmitigated tragedy. His book ends on a note of destruction. He cannot end on a note of hope. He doesn't see that. He praises God from his perspective, as he must. And the perspective is the perspective of prophecy. And he has watched that die. But we view it from another perspective. The men of the great assembly reinstate a different form of Torah. Right? That awesomeness finds a new home. You know, when Jacob was sleeping at the place of the temple, right, long before it had been built, and he had the vision, the dream of the ladder, right, and he realized he was sleeping on the place that was destined to become the temple, and he woke with a start and he said, "Ma noira hamakom hazeh." How awesome is this place? Ma nora. How awesome is this place? The Arizal says, look at the word nora carefully. Reverse the letters, it spells Oren, the Holy Ark. The awesomeness of this place. This is where the ark will rest. Yaakov realizes that. And when that building is destroyed and the ark is no more, it finds a new home. It finds a home in miraculously surviving Jewish heart. Jews survive in the world, carrying the Torah with them in the ark of the human heart and mind, the Jewish heart and mind. And that is a reason for saying a song of Asaph. When the temple is destroyed, the very fact that the building is destroyed drives the Torah into a new home. And that home is guaranteed survival. And that is the Jewish people. The awesomeness that we can say again, returning the crown to its glory in a phase of an oral law that we carry with us, that is the fabric of our hearts and minds and understanding of Torah and the faith that we carry through history. Right? That, in fact, is what it is. Let's go through the questions again. Right? The question is, why is the morning more lenient in the afternoon? Because when the temple is finally destroyed, when the building collapses, right, Jeremiah sees that unmitigated tragedy. But we see a lessening. We see that now that that's over, we guaranteed survival. Right? God's presence is no longer in the world, in a temple, and that's where it will reside. That's no longer in the world. Now we will be kept alive. We will be the ark that carries the Torah through history. Right? That is a reason for immense rejoicing. The light that's represented by that is nothing compared to the former light, but it's guaranteed and it's one with us. Okay, that is the thing. Why are there 12 lines in a get? Because the book of Dvarim, the book of repetition, the book of the receiver, which is the book that we are, right? That's not separated. On the contrary, this is the deepest attachment to the source. The deepest attachment when you realize that this is where Torah finds its home. This is where Torah genuinely comes home. Right? This is where it bonds with the receiver to yield a productive birth. Right? That is not a degree of separation. Let's ask the next question. Why did Jeremiah end on a verse of destruction? Of course he did. He's a prophet. And his world collapses. And a prophet speaks from that perspective. And therefore he talks about it that way. But the men of the great assembly, ushering in a new era for us, right? In that darkness, we look forward to a future redemption that we are marching towards. It does not depend on a building of stone and wood. It depends on the survival of the Jewish people, which is guaranteed. And so we repeat a verse of hope and prayer for the redemption that we move towards. He could not say the word Neira, that was taken away. We say the word Neira again, because the awesomeness that we experience is no longer the awesomeness of a divine presence speaking openly, but it's the awesomeness of the Jewish people's survival, looked on with consternation by dozens of nations, trying most diligently to wipe us out in the most cruel and callous and gross of fashions. And they're forced to acknowledge that after all these centuries, right, we are still here. Their empires have collapsed, one after another, and we are still here. Yeah? Totally and mind-bendingly miraculous. And so those are the answers to the questions, right? Tisha B'Av is the most incredibly sad time, right? Hashem leaves the world, he steps back. The sadness is that he leaves us. The greatness of it is that he leaves us with part of himself. He trusts us, he cuts away, so to speak, part of what he is. He gives us the creative ability to march through history guaranteed to survive, carrying a piece of the original Torah, which is now part and parcel of the hearts and minds of the Jewish people. Right? That is the second part of Tisha B'Av, right? That moves us from the phase of destruction into the phase of hope. And therefore, that is the meaning, right? The basic theme to remember is two phases to Jewish history. The original phase, the revealed phase, miracles and prophecy. The tragic phase when that goes, tragic separation, no proof. You will see no revealed miracles in the world today, openly, clearly, physically revealed. And you will not see prophecy in the world today. Those two go hand in hand, they're both gone. But you'll see something else. It is something that takes vision, something that takes insight, not something obvious. And that is Jewish people's survival, marching through history, forming the Orin, the Ark of the Covenant, ourselves, with Torah engraved on our hearts, so to speak. Write them on the tablets of your heart. Right? That is the redemptive element of Tisha B'Av, right? Paradoxically and amazingly, the Jewish people in the very destruction, and because of that destruction, right, a new birth, a new conception and birth is forged, right? And that is how we wrench from the flames, right, an ongoing eternal existence. That is a very, very amazing message. In the tragedy, right, is the faint strains of a distant song begin to be heard. Okay, let me deal with some of your comments, please. Yes, Leah, I agree with you. Temple is burning. We offered dwelling place in our hearts and minds. Chaim, correct, yes. Rachel is in the world forever, but he's not revealed in the world. He's hidden in the world. Third temple is not have the Shekhinah. No, Joe. Oh, no. The third temple where it all comes home. Absolutely. The third temple is when the third temple is exactly the culmination of all of history, right? Where we and it become one. Right? If you like, Joe, the third temple is the child who is born. First comes the father's effort. Yeah, that's the first stage. Then comes the mother's effort. That's the pregnancy. And what happens when the child is born? The child is a fusion of both of them. In that child who is born is a fusion of the love and the bodies and the essence and the souls of the parent. Right? That's what the third temple is. Not a repetition of what happened before, but a perfection of them. Give me a moment. One moment. Jane. Amazing, beautiful. You were very fortunate to have such perceptive rabbis with you. Yes, amazing. Sony, how you can bring this into your lives? Good question, Sony. Practical question. The answer is by learning Torah, by forming an orin of your body and your soul, right? And if you're a man, it means you're Torah learning. That must be the primary focus of your life, is your Torah learning. If you're a woman, it's your Torah practice, the difference you make in the world. Torah's chesed, how you take that Torah and express it in your hands, and express it in the world, and give birth to a different world. If you want to make this work, right? It's not just basking in the idea, but it's to incorporate within you. Henry, yes, indeed, Henry, you put your finger on another important point. It is after that moment in history that all things begin to fragment. All sorts of reforming breakaways take place, and all sorts of illegitimate distortions. Indeed, they begin at that time. So I'm writing about that in my book. I can't go into detail now. Rina, Mishkan has to reside with each individual, indeed. Indeed. Yes, we become the sanctuary. Even when the Mishkan was built originally, of course, it was meant primarily to reside among us. But it emanated out from that building in the Jewish people. Now we become literally the Mishkan. Right? Bilvovi Mishkan Evne. In my heart, I build a sanctuary. Indeed, of course, that is what it is. Miriam, why do we say HaMelech, Melech HaOlam through the year? Indeed, Miriam, he's always king of the world. Indeed. And we make a blessing acknowledging that he's master of the world. But a separate blessing that focuses on that as the subject. That means HaMelech HaKadosh, right? We praise him specifically for that. Not that in the background he's king of the world, but we make a specific blessing where that's the subject. That must be done during the time of year when that quality is manifest. Okay, Joe, thank you. The wars were not open miracles. An open miracle is where a law of nature is broken. Something falls up instead of down. When a small number of people are victorious over a large army, that is incredible and miraculous, but it's not technically speaking a revealed miracle. Right? Think about that. I think you'll understand what I'm saying. Chaim, if you'd like to repeat this idea that I've just said to you in 10 minutes, I think it can be done. If you go online, there's a video of myself giving this idea over in about a 5-minute talk. I think it was made last year. Don't remember what it's called, but it was there were short videos made by Or Sameach. One was I think Rabbi Bradowitz, one was Rabbi Gottlieb, and one, if I remember correctly, I think the third one, it was myself. If I remember correctly, the others were, as I've said. And if you look online, I think it was on YouTube, there is a video with most terrible background visuals of flames, and that's not my doing, I assure you. But you will find a condensed presentation of these ideas said about a year ago, and I believe it should be still able to download that. Scott, giving blessings for those that we don't, felt so good, not sure what you mean. Chaim, you don't have to quote me. Chaim, this is Rav Moshe Shapira. What I told you tonight was Rav Moshe Shapira. And I did not make this up, I assure you. I'm not on that level. Haley, nice to have you. Tamar, how's Hashem's anger displayed today? Tamar, why are you so convinced that his anger needs to be displayed today? We see his distance today, not his anger. Shoshana, I'm not sure what you're asking, Shoshana. All separations are a form of divorce, right? That's the secret. Amy, thank you. Referring to the homework assignment, Scott, please remind me, please. Giving blessings. Oh, good, excellent. Thank you. Yes, indeed, our homework exercise was to give blessings and not look with jealousy, but look with a good eye. Marvelous, amazing. Tama, I'm not sure what your question is. Richard, yes, indeed. Holocaust is another subject. Indeed, needs to be discussed. Psychology. Sony, not sure what that concept means. You'll have to explain it to me. Chaim, search words for the video. Put in Or Sameach Tisha B'Av, possibly. That's the best I can think of. Is distance worse than anger? That's a good question. Let me think about that. Distance is better than anger. I'll tell you why. When in the presence of divine anger, you can be destroyed. The price you pay for saving yourself, for being saved, is Hashem's distance. Jewish history is one long story of the Jewish people rebelling, taking a step back from Hashem, and the immediate consequence is Hashem takes a step back from us. The tragedy of that is he's distant from us. The benefit in that is we move into a zone where the electricity is low enough that we don't get destroyed. When you're dealing with nuclear energy, there's an enormous amount you can do with it. But if you mishandle it, you get destroyed. Hashem steps away from us throughout history because that's the consequence and the tragic effect of what we do, and it is the reason for our salvation. It's much safer at a distance. Andrew, that's a great question. There's a great correlation with how much Torah is in your own ark and how much divine protection you get. Yes, indeed. To answer that question definitively, look in the first chapter of Emunah and Bitochen, the Chazon Ish's classic work on Emunah and Bitochen, where he explains that concept very, very deeply. If you want a more accessible work on that, that is Rabbi Friedlander's famous work on free will and Hashgacha, divine providence, right? Emunah, that is a classic assembly of these ideas. Okay, there's a lot more to say here. Our time is up. Since we've run out of time, let me wish you, first of all, a Tisha B'Av that will not involve fasting and sadness, right? We can still do it. But if we don't, let's at least remember during Tisha B'Av that there's a reason for relative lessening of the tragedy in the morning and the afternoon as we move, as we realize that in the destruction of the temple, the Jewish people have become a new home for the Torah. Of course, you have to live up to that. Just basking in the knowledge is not good enough, right? You have to make it a suitable home. Let me wish you a wonderful month of summer. I can assure you, you can look forward to a very interesting few weeks of presentation. Again, I'm not free to tell you who it is, but I think you will. I expect you to thank me for this. In addition to some of my previous privately recorded classes that I've given to Rocha to hand out to you. And please come and say hi if I'm in your part of the world. And I look forward to seeing you in the first week of September. Thank you very much and all the best.